Maps have been around for almost as long as civilization, and the concept of getting lost and refusing to ask for directions. They've ranged from the beautiful to the bizarre, but there are some maps that show more than rivers and mountains. They show places that don't officially exist. From a map that shows Antarctica centuries before its discovery, to a Stone Age carving that may outline Europe long before recorded history, these maps don't match what we know. The Piri Reis Map of 1513. This map was built in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer, Piri Reis, and somehow it appears to show Antarctica without its ice. Now, that alone should raise an eyebrow. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. Yet here it is, sketched onto gazelle skin parchment 3 centuries earlier. Piri Reis didn't claim to discover anything himself. In fact, he openly wrote that his map was compiled from around 20 older charts, including some he believed dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. He even mentioned using a map associated with Christopher Columbus. So what we're looking at isn't just one man's work. It's a patchwork of much older knowledge. Only a fragment of the original map survives today, but even that piece is very detailed. The coastlines of South America and West Africa are drawn with surprising accuracy for the time. That's already unusual. But the real debate begins at the bottom of the map, where a landmass appears that many believe resembles Antarctica's coastline, specifically Queen Maud Land. Here's where things get complex. That region has been buried under thick ice for thousands of years. Modern surveys only mapped what lies beneath using seismic data in the 20th century. But some researchers argue the shapes on the Piri Reis map line up closely with those hidden landforms. Historians push back, saying it's a distorted extension of South America, an easy mistake for early cartographers. And to be fair, the map isn't perfect, but the level of accuracy in other areas makes that explanation feel a bit too convenient. So the question remains, was this just clever guesswork of Piri Reis, or a copy of something far older that we no longer have? The Cantino Planisphere of 1502. In 1502, a spy named Alberto Cantino walked out of Portugal with one of the most dangerous objects in Europe, a stolen map. He was working for the Duke of Ferrara, and what he smuggled from Lisbon wasn't some pretty wall chart. It was Portuguese state intelligence, the kind of map kings protected like treasure because it showed trade routes, new coastlines, and claims of empire. The Cantino Planisphere is now one of the oldest surviving maps of the post-Columbus world. And the strangest part is how much it seems to know too early. Brazil had only been officially founded by Cabral 2 years earlier, but the map shows a long stretch of its coastline in surprising detail, farther south than Portuguese records openly admitted at the time. What's even more surprising is that Africa is drawn with strong accuracy around the Cape and up the east coast, while the Caribbean, India, and the Indian Ocean appear with a confidence that feels ahead of its time. Portugal guarded this kind of information under severe punishment, and King Manuel's anger after the theft says plenty. Maybe the Portuguese had simply explored more than they announced. Maybe they were hiding discoveries to protect trade. Or maybe their cartographers were using older charts that never survived. Well, Cantino didn't just steal an old map. He stole a glimpse of what Portugal actually knew before it was ready to tell the world. The Oronce Fine Map of 1531. In 1531, a French mathematician named Oronce Fine published a world map that still raises questions today. He wasn't guessing or sketching for style. This was a man known for precision. Someone who worked with coordinates, astronomy, and measurement. And yet, at the bottom of his map, he drew something no one should have been able to draw. Antarctica. Not just a rough shape either. Fine's map shows a full continent, stretched across the southern pole, complete with mountain ranges, rivers, and detailed coastlines. That alone is strange. Antarctica wouldn't even be officially discovered for nearly 300 years. But what really stands out is how structured it looks. This wasn't a random blob to balance the world. It looks perfectly and precisely mapped. The scale is surprisingly close. The continent spans roughly the right width, and the placement of interior features lines up in ways that feel a bit too specific. Some researchers later compared parts of the map to modern seismic surveys and pointed out similarities with subglacial terrain, features hidden beneath thick ice and only mapped in the 20th century. Historians usually brush this off as imagination mixed with old Greek ideas about a southern landmass, Terra Australis. And sure, that idea existed. But those earlier maps were vague and symbolic. Fine's wasn't. So either he got very lucky placing mountains and rivers exactly where they shouldn't be known, or he was working from something much more ancient, something we don't have anymore. Gerard Mercator's Arctic Map of 1569. In 1569, Gerard Mercator, the same man whose projection still shapes modern maps, drew the Arctic in a way that feels almost surreal. Instead of a frozen cap of ice, he showed an open polar sea, split into 4 regions by powerful currents, all circling a massive black mountain at the center, something he labeled Rups Nigra. According to his notes, this wasn't imagination. He was working from a source called Inventio Fortunata, a 14th century account of a journey to the North Pole. The strange part is that the text itself has completely vanished, leaving only Mercator's interpretation behind. Now it's easy to dismiss the whole thing as myth. The 4 rivers, the central mountain, it all echoes older religious and cosmological ideas. But Mercator wasn't careless with information. His work on magnetism and navigation was serious, and the surrounding coastlines, like Greenland, Iceland, and Northern Europe, are drawn with surprising accuracy for the time. That contrast is what makes this uncomfortable. If he was just filling in blanks, why rely on a named source at all? And why does the structure he drew, a central basin surrounded by ridges, bear a faint resemblance to what modern sonar later found beneath the Arctic Ocean? It's not a perfect match, not even close, but it's enough to raise questions. It can be both. Mercator trusted a source that mixed truth with myth, or that lost account contained fragments of real observations that never made it into official history. The Waldseemüller Map of 1507. This was the first known map to call the new continent America, honoring Amerigo Vespucci. But that isn't even the most strange part. The real issue sits on the other side of the continent. Waldseemüller drew a vast ocean separating America from Asia 6 years before Balboa saw the Pacific in 1513, and 14 years before Magellan crossed it. He also showed South America as its own landmass, not just an extension of Asia, with a western coastline no European was supposed to know. The usual answer is that Waldseemüller was making a smart guess. Scholars knew the world was round. Vespucci had argued this was a new continent, so maybe another ocean had to exist beyond it. Fair enough, but his guess was oddly bold for a serious scholarly map, printed in 1,000 copies and meant as an authority, not a daydream. Only 1 copy survived, later bought by the Library of Congress for $10 million. Even stranger, in a later edition, Waldseemüller backed away from the name America and changed the Pacific depiction. Why retreat from something so important? Maybe he guessed and got nervous. Or maybe he used a source he later realized was too sensitive, uncertain, or dangerous to keep in print. The Philippe Buache Map of 1737. Fast forward to 1737, and another French cartographer adds fuel to the fire. Philippe, the royal geographer of France, presented a map that most people at the time dismissed as speculation. But today, it's a different story. Instead of showing Antarctica as one solid landmass, Buache drew it split into two separate sections, divided by a massive water channel running across the continent. At the time, that sounded like guesswork. Antarctica hadn't even been discovered yet, let alone explored. But here's the problem. Modern science eventually proved him right. In the mid-20th century, seismic surveys revealed that Antarctica is indeed divided beneath the ice. A massive mountain range separates East and West Antarctica, and between them lies a deep, below-sea-level region. If you stripped away the ice, you'd be left with two major landmasses, almost exactly what Buache drew. That's not a vague coincidence. He didn't just sketch random divisions, he placed a specific channel in a location that matches what we now know. Buache claimed he used older sources, though he never said exactly what they were. Some suggest he built on hidden navigation charts from earlier explorers. Others think those charts themselves were copies of something far older. Whatever the case, it leaves a weird gap. Because guessing a split continent is one thing, but putting that split in the right place is something else entirely. The Zeno map of 1558. A Venetian name carries this story, but it doesn't come clean. In 1558, Niccolò Zeno the Younger stepped forward with a story that instantly divided scholars. He claimed to have found old letters and a map from his ancestors describing a voyage across the North Atlantic in the 1390s, long before Columbus ever sailed. The map that came with it showed familiar places like Greenland and Iceland, but also strange additions. There was an island called Frisland, sitting between known lands, and another region to the west, Estodiland, described as a place with towns, books, and signs of European life. That description hits uncomfortably close to what we now know about Norse settlements in Newfoundland, confirmed centuries later. Still, not everything lines up. Frisland doesn't exist, but it was copied onto maps by respected cartographers for generations, including Mercator and Ortelius. That alone makes the whole thing harder to dismiss as a simple forgery. If Zeno made it up, he fooled people who knew maps better than anyone else alive at the time, and parts of his Greenland depiction seem more accurate than other maps from that period, suggesting access to real navigation data. So the map sits in a strange middle ground. It's too flawed to completely trust, but it is also too detailed in the right places to ignore. The Ahmed map of 1559. In 1559, an Ottoman cartographer named Ahmed made a world map that breaks expectations. Sitting in Istanbul, far from the Pacific, he mapped coastlines that his empire had never even approached. The western edge of the Americas, the shores of East Asia, scattered Pacific islands, all drawn with a level of placement that feels out of step with the time. Europe had barely begun to know that ocean. Magellan's expedition had crossed it only decades earlier, and even those maps were rough, closely guarded, and often wrong. But Ahmed's version lines things up in ways European cartographers wouldn't manage for another 2 centuries. And we mean, that's the part that actually sticks. Longitude was still an unsolved problem in the 1500s. Without it, placing coastlines accurately across vast distances was not hard, but impossible. Still, the links between landmasses on this map feel oddly consistent. The usual explanation leans on espionage and trade. The Ottomans had strong intelligence networks, and it's possible that Ahmed gathered fragments from stolen or leaked Portuguese and Spanish charts. But even those charts weren't this clean. They were full of gaps, distortions, and guesswork from sailors who struggled through those waters themselves. So, it leaves a gap in the story. Either Ahmed managed to piece together scattered, unreliable sources into something unusually coherent, or he had access to material that hasn't survived. But in reality, the real truth, no one knows. The Fra Mauro map of 1450. Around 1450, a Venetian monk named Fra Mauro completed a massive world map that didn't just challenge geography, it questioned the timeline of discovery itself. The map is enormous, packed with thousands of notes, and drawn in a way that immediately stands out. South is placed at the top. That wasn't a mistake. It reflected the influence of Arabic and possibly Asian sources, showing the world from a perspective Europe didn't usually use. Fra Mauro wasn't guessing. He worked with merchants, travelers, and texts from across the known world, building something meant to be practical, not decorative. The Indian Ocean appears open and connected, not enclosed as older European maps suggested. Southeast Asia and parts of the East are laid out with surprising clarity. But the detail that really stands out is along Africa's southern edge. The coastline bends naturally around what we now call the Cape of Good Hope. Decades before Portuguese explorers are credited with reaching it. And then there's a note, almost casually included, describing a ship that had already sailed around that southern tip in 1420. That's nearly 70 years before the official story places that journey. It's oddly specific, not the kind of vague claim you'd expect from a rumor. Fra Mauro consistently pointed to older sources, like Arabic texts, classical works, and traveler accounts, as if he was piecing together something that already existed. The map feels less like a discovery and more like a reconstruction, as if the knowledge was already out there, just scattered and waiting to be put back together. The Kangnido Map of 1402. In 1402, inside a Korean royal court, scholars put together a world map that reached far beyond anything their own ships had ever seen. The Kangnido map wasn't just focused on East Asia, it stretched outward, covering India, the Middle East, Europe, and, most surprisingly, Africa. And not as a rough guess either. The continent is drawn long and narrow, tapering toward the south in a way that feels far too accurate for the time. This was nearly a century before Portuguese sailors even made it around the southern tip of Africa. Yet, here it is, outlined with confidence by people who had never been there. The map itself was built from a mix of Korean, Chinese, Japanese, and Islamic sources, pulled together from libraries and trade knowledge rather than direct exploration. That explanation works, up to a point, because many of those same source traditions didn't show Africa this clearly. So something doesn't quite line up. Either the Korean scholars had access to better material than we assume, or fragments of older geographic knowledge were moving across cultures in ways we still don't fully understand. The Kangnido map doesn't feel like a lucky sketch. It feels like someone, somewhere, already had a clearer picture of the world. Well, that's all for now. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe for more such amazing content. Take care, and we'll catch you later.